going to click record to start the session. And the purpose of these, and these are weekly text chats. They happen or will happen every Friday at this time. And it's an opportunity for anyone who's interested to share some of the books or articles they've come across in the last week or two that they feel have been kind of relevant for our own growth, have helped us kind of think about our own practices and processes, and that we want to share. And so what I'll invite everybody to do, and I'll start with some of the ones that are on my mind and that I've been thinking about. And then I'd love to turn it over to all of you to share as well. And I'm happy to give over screen sharing, right? So you can share if you want to directly if there's an article you have up that you want to share, or you can type the title and the details in the chat and we can all take a look or note on our own notepads, whether they be digital or analog, so we can take a look and read them ourselves. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen. And first, let me make sure I have everything pulled up. Awesome. And I'm going to share a couple books that I've been thinking about, books that I'm currently reading or I've just read. And then I've got two articles that I've really been thinking quite a bit about over the last week or so. So let me just share that out. Okay. Awesome. So let me go to, okay. So I'm going to start with some books. And so a book that has been really impactful for me, one of the things I found has been an area for me to work on. And by the way, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Fred Ende. I'm the Director of Curriculum for Putnam Northern Westchester BOCES in the northern suburbs of New York City. And in working with districts in the northern suburbs, one of the things that is really important is making sure that we accurately hear what the needs are of our teachers and leaders and students who we serve. And one of the challenges for me that I've found is that sometimes my mind moves to answer mode sooner than it should as I'm listening or engaging in conversation with people. And so building on my skill set as it pertains to active listening and to really moving myself to a supportive stance as a listener rather than a fixing stance as a listener is something I've been thinking about. And so two of the books I'm going to share with you are focused on building listening skills. And so this first one by Shane Safer is called The Listening Leader. Shane Safer, who will actually be joining us for a PL on the Go session a week from today. She was a building principal. She has been a consultant. And one of the things that was really impactful for her throughout her career was understanding that the role of any leader is first and foremost the role of a listener. And yes, the actions we take as teachers or leaders are very important, but what helps us make sure those actions are most impactful is making sure that we really hear people. And so The Listening Leader is a great book written about how to build our listening skills, really purely in the realm of education. And what Safer does really, really well is she provides a skill set and series of ways to think about our skill set that can really be acted on. And she does it in a way that also doesn't just speak to the importance of listening in general, but she frames it as a tool to boosting equity and equitable practices in school, right? And the idea is that if we really listen and learn how to listen to people, then we're more likely to understand who they really are. And if we understand who they really are, it provides us with the ingredients to make sure that the actions we take are most equitable for the students and adults who we serve, right? So it's a fantastic book. It's written in a really easy to access way. There are a lot of figures that can be utilized. There's a great figure in there that's, she calls it the birdcage of inequity. And so all of the parts of the cage are different aspects of our work that put us in positions where we would want to think about equity. And it's a great conversation piece to have as people start to examine their practices and whether they're truly equitable. And it's all kind of framed in how we can use listening to help us do that. So a great book, and like I mentioned, she'll be joining us for a PL on the Go session next week to talk a little bit about her work in this area. The second book is also about listening. This one is called You're Not Listening. I'm just finishing it up now. I wish I actually had it down here with me because the passages in it are fantastic. Kate Murphy comes from a different camp. She is a journalist for the New York Times. And so she writes this book as, the importance of listening as an interviewer. What does it mean to really understand where people are? And so her stories are a little bit different, right? And the experience she draws upon. But what's fascinating is it melds really well with the Safer book, because in the end, the same skills that Murphy uses in order to connect with her interview subjects are precisely what we need to be doing in order to connect with our kids and our teachers and our families. What I like about You're Not Listening is by taking a look at these skills outside of like the classroom or outside the school building, it further highlighted for me why I need to be doing some of this in my own interactions with friends, and with my wife, and with my kids, my parents, right? So they're two great books to read side by side. They're both very easy reads. They go very quick. And if you read them in close proximity, it really provides a great parallel and overlap for thinking about our own listening skills. The third text, which is one I'm reading for a book talk currently, is called The New Team Habits. This is kind of like a workbook style. It's written by Anthony Kim. Anthony Kim leads an organization called Education Elements. He wrote a book a few years ago called The New School Rules. And basically what that book does and what this book expands on is tries to lay the groundwork for thinking about some of our normal processes a little bit differently. One that I've been talking a lot about is the importance of rethinking our organizational structures. So for instance, in basically every school I know, even when we try to flatten interactions, there's a hierarchical structure, right? There are often students, right, who are expected to respect and kind of follow the directions of their teachers. Teachers who do the same for assistant principals or vice principals and principals, and then building leaders, right, principals, who do that for district level leaders. And so you end up with this real hierarchical approach. And one of the things the New School Rules and the New Team Habits attempt to do is push people towards rethinking that. So instead of making decisions based on an organizational chart or roles, shifting towards a skill set decision-making process where you look at your staff, right, regardless of the role they're in, whether it's a paraprofessional, teacher aide, a related service provider, teacher, principal. And because you know people well enough to know what they're really skilled in, you utilize those people based on their skills to make decisions about what they have expertise in. And so your cabinet in a given time period isn't necessarily composed of your school or district leaders. It's composed of the people who have the skill sets to help you deal with whatever the initiatives you're focused on are, right? So your cabinet could be teacher aide, a school psychologist, might even be a series of secondary level students, could be a principal, etc. Right? But you're welcoming all these people to help you in solving those challenges. And what the New Team Habit does is it focuses in on a few of these rules in depth and provides school and district leaders with a practical process to initiating some of these, right? So everything from recognizing and welcoming failure and how you go about building a culture in your schools that allow for that, to using a check-in process at the start of all meetings to make sure people are grounded and feel that they can be connected to whatever the learning is. And then I'm going to share two articles with you rather quickly, and then I'll turn it over to you. I am a big fan of the Harvard Business Review as a good balance to the educational reading I do. In some cases, the ideas are very similar, but as you all know, education as a profession often operates 5 or 10 years in some cases behind our other sectors, right? So I find it valuable to check in with what people are talking about in those other sectors. This article was a fantastic one. It's called The Elements of Good Judgment. It comes from just a couple months ago. The Harvard Business Review released in January. And what Lickerman talks a little bit about is what goes into effective judgment practices, right? And so he highlights a number of really important pieces that we all need to keep in mind. And let's see if it's actually in here. I don't know, but there are elements to this where yeah, here we go. Right. So besides just identifying what it means to have good judgment and what we should be looking for, there are also pieces about how to improve some of these different elements of effective judgment for all of us. I think as educators, we often learn to trust our guts and to be comfortable making decisions from that perspective. This article dives into why our guts are usually right and how we can strengthen parts of our decision making that sometimes push our guts aside. And then the last piece, this I came across just a couple days ago. Uh, so this blog post, one thing I think in education that we get very used to is saying yes to things, and that's good, right? I mean, we provide service to people as our rationale for the work we do. But sometimes we do have to learn to say no, and we have to become effective at being better at saying no. So in this blog post, Forrest takes this really kind of interesting approach where he breaks down a number of different categories for things in our lives, right? And then he talks a little bit about not only the value of saying no to some of them, but also how to go about doing that. And there's this really great appendix at the end where he dives into some of those decisions a little bit more. And it's a long article if you were to read through it in full, but he shows a great visual representation. Not only, take something like procrastination, not only how to avoid it, but what are some texts that can help you or help those you work with think about building on their proactive rather than reactive skills, but also sometimes some good quotes, that you can build into the work you do with your colleagues to help think about some of these aspects of our lives and work. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I would turn it over to, we're a small enough group. There's 9 of us in the room. And so anybody wants to hop on and share some of the text materials you've been thinking about, whether they be books or resources. If you have something up that you want to share, awesome. Or if you just want to talk about it, this is a time and space to do that. So I'm going to mute and turn it over to whoever wants to pop in. And there's no pressure to share. If if people don't want to do that, that's okay too. But the hope is that if there's anything that you're reading or thinking about reading or articles you come across that that we have the chance to share those, because I'm happy to curate and find some, but I definitely don't want to share for for an hour's worth of time. So I'd love if anybody's got anything that they've been reading, they've been thinking about reading, articles they've come across, because that would be helpful to all of us. So the great thing about wait time in a virtual world is it's real easy, right? You know, we can just mute our microphones and wait. But I will say too, for the benefit of everybody on the call, if we feel that we don't have anything else to share, we can definitely end the end the session early. I'm happy to hold these on a weekly basis and share some of the things that I've come across. I tend to do some pretty active reading. What I'd also recommend for those interested, if you're not already receiving them, there are a couple great resources that are excellent curators of educational materials. One of them is the Marshall Memo. So I'm going to put these in the chat box, and they're valuable. I'll connect you to the links too and pop them up there. So just give me 1 second. So the Marshall Memo is a weekly roundup of what Kim Marshall, who was a principal and school leader in Massachusetts, what he's read that week in education that's really valuable and powerful. These are subscription services, so they're not free, right? So you'd have to kind of weigh the cost with what you'd hope to get out of it. The nice thing is that for those of you who, you know, if you're working in an environment where you have other people who might want to join these services as well, when you subscribe in a large group, you know, when you subscribe in a large group, you're able to access them at a reduced rate. So here's the Marshall Memo, right? And then this other one is called the Main Idea. And like the Marshall Memo, the Main Idea is also a monthly curation of books, right? Educational texts that Jen David Lang, who runs that service, that she's read and that she summarizes. So you can think of Marshall Memo as if you get a lot of periodicals, one of the periodicals that I like to read is The Week. The Week is basically what it says. It's a weekly roundup of news that's happening around the world, and it just in 30 pages, right, you can kind of capture a lot of what people are talking about. Now, in a time like now, basically everything's about, COVID-19 and the coronavirus, right? So it's not, but normally, in normal circumstances, it's really helpful as a roundup. The Marshall Memo does that same type of thing for education, and the Main Idea does that for education texts that have come out. And if you're working in a school, college, wherever it might be, if you have staff who you think would benefit from having a service like that, you can sign up as a group, and with an institutional discount, significantly reduce the rate of a per person subscription. Both of them are excellent and fantastic. I would recommend them to anybody as a way to stay on top of education articles, both of the research and non-research based variety. So Kim Marshall pulls from some of the AERA journals, as well as from journals of other resources. And then Jen David Lang pulls from educational publishers. So you'd find books from Corwin, Stenhouse, Ion Education, sometimes ASCD, and she takes 200 or 300 page books and turns them into a really what's a 10-page summary, kind of like the educational cliff notes, right? Turns them into a 10-page summary, along with sometimes professional development resources as well. So if you wanted to read, let's say, The Listening Leader, and she had summarized that book, before you went and purchased that, let's say, for your school leaders, right? She would take you'd be able to take a look, read through there, and even see some of the resources she provided to go through and use that resource. So, set your calendars, if you like, for Friday at 1:00, and moving forward, we'll continue to post these. Like I said, I'm always happy to share. I've got more than enough recommendations, and I tend to read quite a bit. And I think too, it becomes even more powerful when we have other resources as well, because I'm always looking for good things to read, whether they're about education or not. So I'll open it up to the group for any last minute shares. If anybody's got anything that's on their mind that they're thinking about in terms of resources, feel free to chime in. Otherwise, I wish everybody a good Friday afternoon and great weekend. So thanks for joining. I hope that this was valuable. You picked up on a couple resources, maybe some books to read, and looking forward to not only seeing you hopefully next week at this time, but for our other PL on the go sessions. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pop a couple links in the chat before we go. One that has our schedule for where to find our PL on the go sessions. So if you just bear with me, I'm going to pop that in there so you have it, and that'll be a place where you can access all of our professional learning options, for the time when we're away. Let's see. Just pop that in there. And so here's that's the link to, and I'm not sure why it's not coming up as a hot link, but that's the link to our offerings. And then I'm also going to post two more things. One is a feedback survey. So if there's anything that you feel would have made this session more accessible, or things specifically that you want to talk about when we talk texts, you can complete that survey. And lastly, if there's anything you want to see us providing, in these 1 hour short blocks, here's a link to propose a professional learning session. Okay. So there you go. So it's great to see you all. Hope all of you are well. It's great to see a number of familiar faces and names over the last couple of weeks. I feel like I'm connecting not only with people who I already know, but people who I'm just getting the chance to meet. So looking forward to seeing you all in the future, and have a great rest of the Friday and a great weekend. Oh, wait, you're muted. Hold on, Rosie, you're coming up muted. So if you unmute yourself.
Okay.
Yep, there you go. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you so much for your themes. Interesting books.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Yeah, I'm always happy to talk about books and books to read. So it's a great hobby of mine, and something that I always try to do more of. So it's fun to have this time.
Thank you.